Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hello, Rush Nation, and welcome to the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast. We are back, so that is myself and Rich. Rich, going to throw it over to you straight away. How are you doing, bud?
I'm good. It rained. I'm very happy it rained. I didn't think I'd ever be so happy to see rain. Feels slightly ridiculous. My wife said to me, I'm officially getting old, because the first thing I said when it rained was, good, the grass needs it. So, I'm officially old as of today.
You were old to me anyway, but yeah, you were officially old. We'll go with that.
How are you, Liam?
All good, yeah. I mean, I wasn't really paying attention to the weather. I work from home, and I'm not old enough to think about my grass. So I don't need to. I need to worry about the weather. But yeah, it's been a good week. We've got a lot of just a little bit of a teaser. We've got a lot of UKFFC talk behind the scenes going at the moment, haven't we, Rich? So that's in full swing.
It's been busy.
But that is nothing to do with today's pod. We, as eagle-eyed listeners can see on the stream, we don't have a guest. So we are going to be riding just me and Rich for the next 4 weeks into the season. We're going to be kicking off a nice little series, Rich. So we've called it Around the League in 4 pods. So the format, as you probably guessed, it is 2 divisions each pod. And this week we're starting out in the Wild West. So that is the AFC and the NFC West divisions. We're both going to be given one player, and we'll just be talking about one player from each team in each division that we really want to, so we can try and cover everything. So, Rich, I'm going to throw it straight over to you, let you dove straight into this. Who's your first player that you want to speak about? And we'll start in the NFC West on the 49ers, shall we say?
Yeah, so I first of all, before we dive in, I just want to say I've been looking forward to doing this for like a couple of months. I think it's one of my favourite things, where we get to quick fire, try and be as brief as possible, which is not something that I traditionally do very well, but we're going to try and cover as many guys in a short space of time as possible. But yeah, my first guy is Brandon Ayuk. I think I'm fascinated by Ayuk. I think that I'm significantly higher than consensus on him. I think that he's currently ADP wide receiver 42, which is criminal. I think if people realised just how good he was down the stretch, I think you could probably, potentially even flip those numbers and he'd be sort of a top 24 wide receiver. I really like his fit with Trey Lance. I think we've already seen the clips of Trey Lance pushing the ball down the field more, which I think fits nicely with Ayuk's play style. I think he is going to be that, traditional outside receiver that's going to stretch the field, and I think it fits nicer with Trey Lance than Jimmy Garoppolo, who we all know is great in the middle of the field and the short to intermediate routes, but doesn't have the arm strength to kind of push the ball downfield as such. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Ayuk?
I mean, you've been seeing, as you said, you've seen the clips. You saw Trey Lance in the preseason. I mean, this has become a bit more of a Trey Lance segment than a Brandon Ayuk segment, but you saw Lance play in the preseason against the Packers, and he pushed the ball down the field twice on 2 good deep routes. I just think that Lance is going to be a great addition for Ayuk, and that's the best possible change for Ayuk. I mean, let's face it, Jimmy G, for whatever reason, didn't use Ayuk as much as he probably should have, but he had Deebo Samuel step up completely. Now, that is wonderful in some aspects, but at the same time, we need to figure out what's going to happen in that offense with Trey Lance, because it's not going to stay the same as what happened under Jimmy G. I mean, looking at last year's stats, Ayuk was in the doghouse for whatever reason, and then he got himself out of it weeks 8 to 18. Sorry, he was the wide receiver 16. He didn't have a bye week, so let's change that to points per game, and that would have been wide receiver 24 in as I said, weeks 8 to 18 in PPR. So I think Ayuk's a really good buy low candidate for this year coming up. I mean, this whole part of the off season is everyone can be a wide receiver too, but I think Ayuk is the one that I'm most confident in taking that leap, other than, let's say, Juju and Rashad Bateman. But he's probably the one at his cost that I'm smashing every time, because I think he's the most likely to step up, and he's still really young.
Yeah. I mean, he's my wide receiver 23. He's currently wide receiver 42 at AP. That kind of says it all, I guess. So moving to your guy from the 49ers, Liam, who did you want to talk about?
I want to talk about Debo, to the other side of the wide receiver core here. I mean, he had a great season last year. He's just been paid, but as we've talked about with Ayuk, if Ayuk takes that step up, does that mean that Debo is going to be affected with Trey Lance coming in? I mean, we're going to be seeing a lot more deep balls in my opinion. And just from what we've seen from Lance, there's a lot more deep balls, and that doesn't bode well with the way Debo was used last year. And then I know a lot of people were enamored with the usage that Debo got, especially with the backfield usage. I mean, with a fully healthy backfield and having a third-round rookie drafted on top of the two they drafted last year, and they've shown that they are willing to take 4, maybe even more than that, running backs into the season. What do you feel about Debo and Debo's usage? Because to me, at the moment he's going as the wide receiver 5 in ADP. That's DLF for June. I mean, to me, he's a pretty easy player to nominate, as his usage is going to go down a little bit, and therefore his cost is currently at a peak.
Yeah, I think, look, Debo had an incredible year last year, and for me, I don't see his usage in the backfield as a positive. You know, we talk about running backs, and I think the stat is a target for a running back is worth 2.6 more points than a carry. And I don't want to see, you know, my receivers, if they're going to get the odd touch here or there, but I don't want to see Debo lining up in the backfield 15, times a game. That's not where I want him. I want him, catching those screens, catching those short intermediate routes in space that Shanahan can scheme open, and allowing him to go to work and, show that incredible run after the catch ability that he has. I'm nervous about Debo this year, because I think that it's not necessarily negative on Debo. I just think that Ayuk and Debo are a lot closer than perhaps the Dynasty community are talking. You said that he's wide receiver 5 in ADP. He's ranked number 7 for me. So, I've got them, what's that off the top of my head, 16 spots ahead. Yet the Dynasty community's got them 37 spots difference. And I just think that I wouldn't be gobsmacked if we're sitting in a year and Ayuk has scored more fantasy points than Debo. And I think that the way that the community of, we've got him ranked in ADP, the way people are talking about it, I think I'm probably in the significant minority when I've got that opinion.
I mean, I get it. I've got Debo ranked a little bit lower. I think I've got him ranked around the wide receiver 9 number at the moment. But I think the difference more comes from Ayuk than Debo. I think people are just really low on Ayuk at the moment. But because we talk way too much, we need to move on, Rich. Else we're just never going to finish this in an hour. So the next team we're going to talk about is the Cardinals, and I'll start with my player. We'll stay with the wide receiver group, and we'll talk about Marquise Hollywood-Brown. Now, with Brown, my question to you, Rich, is what do you feel he's going to do in this offense? I mean, he's currently going as the wide receiver 22. To me, that is influenced by the DeAndre Hopkins suspension. So Hopkins is out for the first 6 weeks, so he'll be back in week 7. But to me, wide receiver 22 is a tough value for me right now. He's young. He's going to a team with his college quarterback, so you don't expect the usual time frame of him to get acclimated with that quarterback and build that chemistry. But at the same time, he's not played with Kyler Murray for how many years now? Murray's been in the league for 4 years, so
yeah.
He's not played for him for that long, if not even more. I can't remember when Hollywood came out, but do you think that Murray is going to be able to support 2 wide receivers in that offense? And to me, I think the other question is, if not, do you think Hollywood is a sell and kind of like that value play week 3, week 4, when he's had a few good games, but people aren't really thinking about DeAndre Hopkins in the immediate future? Because if you try and sell him in week 5, week 6, I think that value is going to have dropped because people have already got Hopkins in their mind.
Yeah, I think you've nailed the exact situation you want to be hitting with Hollywood. I find Hollywood strange because I was always higher than consensus on him in Baltimore and seemed to kind of stand alone on that. And then as soon as he got traded, everybody seemed to laud it as this incredible thing for Hollywood and that it was amazing for his value. And I just couldn't get it. And I got a lot of flack when I said he was a loser for me from the draft because I thought he went from a situation, he saw 145 targets in that Baltimore offense last year. And yes, Kyler is a better deep ball thrower. Yes, the Cardinals are likely to be a more pass-first offense, but I can't see a world in which Hollywood Brown's going to see 120 targets, let alone 145 targets. You've then got to add in, when do we want our fantasy players to score the most points? At the end of the season when it matters in playoff time? Well, okay, Hollywood's going to be the clear number 1 receiver in this offense for the first 6 weeks, but I think people are forgetting how good DeAndre Hopkins is, and I think that this offense's passing game's still going to run through DeAndre Hopkins. We've seen Kyler's stats over the last 2 years are incredible when he's targeting DeAndre Hopkins, and are below average whenever he's targeting any other receiver on the Cardinals. And for me, I think that Hollywood's overvalued at the moment, and I think that you laid out the perfect scenario is get a couple of good weeks, week 1, week 2, and then I'd be looking to cash in because I think that when Hopkins comes back, I think he's going to be a guy that, yes, he's going to have some flash weeks. Yes, he's going to have some weeks where he catches 2 deep balls and puts up a 5 reception for 150 yards and 2 touchdown game and can win you a week. But I think there's going to be weeks where this offense isn't firing. I am not a fan of Kingsbury. And I think that this offense could stutter and not allow Hollywood to put up those fantasy points when you need it most, when there's Hopkins there as well. So, yeah, I'm pretty much out at his ADP, and I think that it could be a good opportunity to sell because people are still valuing him as that true number 1.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So moving to my guy. So it's James Conner. I think that we saw a fairly ridiculous season last year, and I think that anyone expecting that level of touchdown performance may be disappointed. However, we are obviously having lost Chase Edmonds, who got a lot of the work between the 20s. So I think it's a question mark of, is James Conner going to get more work to compensate for that touchdown regression? Or is he going to see a similar level of work? Are we going to see, whether it be Williams, whether it be Keontae Ingram or Benjamin for the 4th year in a row is going to break out? What do you think of Conner and his value, Liam?
Yeah, I think at the moment, as running back 20 is a perfect win now option, but I don't see him as anything other than that. I mean, last year he still had over 1,100 scrimmage yards. That's 750 on the ground and 350 just over in the air. I mean, when you look at those stats, I think it's incredible what you do to those stats when you take a normal touchdown season. I mean, he had 18 total touchdowns, 15 rushing, 3 in the air. You move that to a 10 touchdown season, which is, I'd say, above average for a running back. Now, you take that to 10 touchdowns, and he suddenly goes from being, what was it, the RB5, I believe it was last year, to the RB14. Or when you look at it from points per game perspective, the RB21. I mean, if we're expecting Darrell Williams or Keontae, whoever as the RB2 to step into a role similar to Chase Edmonds, then I can only assume that with the touchdown regression that because I can't foresee him being anywhere near 18 touchdowns again, I can only assume that he is not going to repay a top or bounce back as a running back one, basically. As his current ADP, I was surprised to see it was the RB20. I thought it was going to be higher than that. So I can kind of see it. But yeah, apart from that, I think he's going to keep a very similar role to last year. He's also never spent a whole season healthy, which literally scares me a little bit. I mean, he's had 2 near full seasons, but still. Last year with 15 games was the most he played in one season.
I think the one underrated kind of benefit of James Conner is that a lot of these veteran running backs on second contracts have got outs after this year. You know, you think of Dalvin Cook, you think of basically any running back on a second contract not named Alvin Kamara and Nick Chubb. Well, James Conner's in that bracket. You know, the Cardinals can't really move on from him until after the 24 season. So he's got, after the 23 season. So he's got at least 2 seasons as the Cardinals starting running back, which when we're talking about win now moves, you know, that's a lot better than a lot of running backs if you can guarantee a guy's going to be a starter for 2 years. So my next guy with the Rams, who are the next team on the list, so it's Tyler Higby. Basically, he's in that meh category of tight end for me. I think that he's kind of the forgotten man. Everybody's bigging up Allen Robinson, feels like the hype guy. You know, we're talking about the potential running backs, but I think that Tyler Higby could be a decent free tight end, basically, because you're probably having to pay a third for him in trade value. So yeah, I think that if you're looking for a guy that you can kind of get by with, perhaps you're in you're loaded elsewhere, but you've got nothing at tight end. I think I could personally go a lot worse than going out and buying Tyler Higby for free, because I think that we know the Rams offense is going to be good. We know that he's got that role carved out. He's not got much competition. He's going to get some decent red zone usage. And yeah, he's going to be hit and miss. He's never going to be a top 5-6 tight end, but you know, he's going to at least give you some potential touchdown on a week-to-week basis. What do you think, Liam? Are you being disgusted by me suggesting to go out and buy Tyler Higby?
I am pleased that you brought a tight end onto the list, because when I was looking at the players that I wanted to talk about, it was basically exclusive running backs and wide receivers. So it's a nice fresh point. But with Tyler Higby, I think that at cost, he's pretty much fine. I don't mind you going out and getting him. The one thing I will say is he feels pretty flat in terms of his ceiling and floor. I don't think there's much between either one. I mean, last year when I was looking at his stats in PPR, he had 1 spike week, and that was in the very final week, so it probably didn't help a lot of people. So as a backup, or maybe even a tight end 3 to 4, that when you just want a stable around 10 PPR points, he's a great buy. You're probably not even having to pay a third for him, probably a random bench person, and you might be able to get him for that. His current ADP is tight end 26, which actually has creeped up over the past few months, which I've been surprised about. But personally, I am not taking him at cost, because when I was looking at ADP for this month, You've got Brevin Jordan at tight end 28, which I'd prefer just from a longevity point of view, and Evan Engram as tight end 25, so going a spot before him. And everyone knows, if you've been listening, that I'm a big Evan Engram fan for this year. So one spot or one tight end rank above, I'd much rather take a shot at Evan Engram than Higby. One good thing I will say about Higby is last year is the tight end 14 and tight end 15 in points per game. And he actually had a better points per game than Frymouth and Gesicki, which surprised me. It was only by a few decimal points, but it was still better. So,
yeah, I'm looking forward to the Miami Dolphins section where I get to slag off Mike Gesicki some more. So,
let's move on to the Rams running back, Rich. So, I want to talk about Cam Akers. He's currently going as the RB16. To me, that is too high. We still haven't seen a whole lot from Akers. I mean, he's had some really good games, don't get me wrong, but he's also had stints where he's been really ineffective. You could say last year that it was down to the Achilles. He did have an amazing turnaround time, so that's fine. But you take that away and look at his rookie season, he still didn't have a great stint at times. I mean, he had that amazing end of the season into the playoffs, I believe it was, run. But apart from that, he's not done a whole lot, and that could be down to injuries. And there was a three-headed backfield in his rookie season with Darrell Henderson and Malcolm Brown in that offense. But I just question the RB16 price tag on him, especially when you look at ADP and you're seeing J.K. Dobbins go as the RB18. And a guy that we're going to talk about soon is Kenneth Walker at RB22. I don't understand why you're taking Akers at 16 when you can get either of those 2 and 4 spots later.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've struggled with Akers. He's a guy that I was always lower than consensus. I think, in that between 2020 and 2021 off season before the injury, he was getting hyped to ridiculous levels. He was up at sort of RB4, RB5 in terms of ADP. It was obscene. And I was always a little bit speculative around that. And then we had the injury, and I can't decide whether him coming back from the injury and playing in the playoffs is a good thing, or him looking so bad when he did is a bad thing. And I've gone back and forth over it. I then sort of dove in and had a bit more of a detailed look at that 2020 playoff run that we kind of hold up as being so amazing. And it really wasn't that impressive when you look at it. So there was a stretch between week 12 and week 15. Okay. In week 12, he had a really impressive, really efficient game, 9 carries, 84 yards and a touchdown, finished as the running back 16. Okay. Great week on limited usage. That we then had the Darrell Henderson injury. He then saw 21 carries in week 13, 1 touchdown, 72 yards. Not that impressive. Not that great a week. Finished as the RB13. The next week, he then saw 29 carries, run for 171 yards, but only scored 21.4 fantasy points and finished as the RB10. So this is a guy that we hold up as this great finish to the season, but he only actually had 1 week where he finished as an RB1. I just don't see it. And I tend to agree with you that this is a guy that I think he's overpriced. For me, I would rather Darrell Henderson at cost. If you're giving me a guy that's produced an RB1 week 8% of the times he's been on the field, like that's not a guy that I can be drafting in the top 20. He's my RB21. I don't think I've got any shares because I basically am not willing to take him any higher than that, quite frankly. But you mentioned a guy you'd take over Cam Akers as we move on to the Seattle Seahawks. And that's the guy that I'd like to talk about, and is Kenneth Walker. I liked him as a prospect. He was a clear number 2 for me behind Breece Hall, but he was the clear number 2, and he was miles ahead of the running back 3 in terms of where he's at in this class. He goes to a situation where look, we know Seattle wants to run the ball. As far as I'm concerned, that's a good offense for a running back to score fantasy points. And I don't quite get why people aren't on board with him as a potential stud. He ticks a lot of the boxes. The only question mark is that receiving usage. And I'm not convinced that it's a him issue. Think it's perhaps more of a scheme issue. We had some question marks about Jonathan Taylor as a pass catcher coming out, and he's shown in the league that he can still catch passes adequately. I think that it's slightly funny and slightly ironic that we're viewing Rashad Penny, who has played, 10 games in his NFL career, something like that, through 4 or 5 seasons, as a potential blocker for Kenneth Walker. I think, yeah, sure, Rashad Penny's fantastic when he was on the field. Those last 4 or 5 games last year were incredible. But are we really sitting here saying Rashad Penny is going to be the guy that stops Kenneth Walker producing? For me, I think at the moment he's completely undervalued. I think people are in redraft mode and they don't see the scenario for Kenneth Walker to produce. So I think he could potentially be a great buy. What about you, Liam? What do you think about Walker?
Yeah, I absolutely love this. I was extremely happy when you put him on their show sheet after I put Cam Akers and put my notes in there, just from a showmanship point of view. Being able to transition from one to the other felt really nice. But I mean, I've got Cam Akers. I've got Kenneth Walker at a great value, RB22. The thing that I wanted to pick up on is you said that he was got stud potential, but do you really think he's got, as in like top 5, top 10 upside in terms of dynasty value? Because yes, if he does really well this season, then he is going to spike in value. Or even if when Rashad Penny doesn't live up to the hype, which is similar to like a Cam Akers style hype, but for a fourth year back, or going into his 5th year, I think it is. For Kenneth Walker specifically, I just struggle with that ceiling. I don't know where to put it. I struggle with putting him as an RB1 ceiling wise. He just has that feeling of being similar to a David Montgomery or a Josh Jacobs in terms of probably going to be better than everyone drafts him at, but is probably never going to be valued at what he should be for what his production is. What do you feel about that, Rich?
I think that he's absolutely got that ceiling. This is a guy that he's a 91st percentile prospect in my model. That puts him, the guys he's ahead of directly in the model: Le'Veon Bell, Travis Etienne, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, Ray Rice, Najee Harris. That's pretty elite company that he's in terms of a statistical profile. This is a guy that had one of the best running back seasons we've seen in college for a number of years. He was incredible. And I think that he's in a scheme and an offense that is going to utilize him well. And I wouldn't be shocked if Seattle is better than people think. That's not me sitting here saying they're going to be amazing, but I don't necessarily think they're going to be terrible. I think that offensive line is, yes, it's not elite, but it's kind of average. And I think that's all he needs. And I think that, the question we have is that the truly top tier elite running backs, they need that kind of combination of rushing and receiving in order to get that super duper elite production. I agree that is a slight concern with Walker. But if he can produce this year at a decent level, enable the Seahawks to commit to him fully next year, you're then bringing in a potentially, we're expecting they're going to get one of the top quarterbacks next year. Wouldn't you want the running back on an offense, whether it be Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, that's going to lean on that running back? And I foresee a scenario where he is easily a top 5 back this time next year. Do I think that's his, realistic outcome? No, I think, he's probably going to settle in as maybe a top 12 back in terms of dynasty value next year. But there is absolutely the ceiling there. And I think that I've got no concerns about him potentially hitting that point.
So I'm going to move on to my player for the Seahawks, and that is DK Metcalf. I mean, the reason I brought him up is he's just been paid. He is the wide receiver 9 in ADP right now, and I feel like he's not valued like that in terms of trades. In drafts, ADP of wide receiver 9, I think is a little bit rich. I think I've got him one spot higher, so it's not horrendous. But in trades, I think that you can get him for a lot less than wide receiver 9 numbers. When you look into this season, I think it's an absolutely huge season for me, or well, for him, sorry. So when you look at it, if he has a mediocre season with whatever the quarterback situation is going to be there, we don't know whether it's going to be Drew Lock or Geno Smith, but if he has a mediocre season, where do you think that value drops? I think it could be dropped. It could be dropped to mid to even late wide receiver, 2 numbers, so around wide receiver 24 latest. But then if he has a pretty good season, not even just like a pretty good season with these type of quarterbacks, and then goes on to get a top quarterback in the draft, I think that he is going up in value. The issue is that price is very volatile at the moment, and I think that he's a massive risk of whatever you pay for him right now. If you're not getting him as a wide receiver 24, which you are not going to get for him, he could go either way with his current value. And you could say that about a lot of people, if not everyone. But I think with DK, it's one of the most volatile situations for a wide receiver in the top 10 in Dynasty, similar to a Debo situation, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been lower than consensus on DK since before he was drafted, to be honest. I was lower in the pre-draft process. I was lower in the post-draft process, and I've pretty much been lower throughout his entire NFL career to date. And shockingly, I'm at wide receiver 16 with him at the moment, so I'm still lower than consensus. I think that I agree with everything you've said. I don't see a scenario where he rises in value currently. I think it would take him producing as a wide receiver 1 this year. You know, he'd need to finish as a top 12 receiver and get an elite rookie quarterback in for him to just maintain as the wide receiver 9. So for me, I think it's a potential sell because as you've laid out, look, he's catching passes from Drew Lock and Geno Smith. That's not a great recipe for fantasy success. I wouldn't be taking him in the top 12 in redraft this year. I'm just trying to have a look where I've got him in redraft.
I've seen him around mid wide receiver 2 in redraft, if not
wide receiver
2.
Wide receiver 22 for me currently in redraft. So look, I think that he is an elite talent. There is no doubt about that. But I just don't see a world in where his value rises. So I think for me, I agree with you. It's a good opportunity to sell and to move on.
So Rich, that takes us through the NFC West. Let's hop over to the AFC. We'll start with the Broncos. Who have you got as your first player for the Broncos?
So I'm going Courtney Sutton. I've gone through a bit of a kind of a roller coaster ride with Courtney Sutton. He's a guy that I've loved for years. I was really high before the injury. I expected him to fully bounce back, and last year he was just really disappointed. And giving him the benefit of the doubt that he had some poor quarterback play, he was coming back from the injury. I got really excited when Russell Wilson landed, and I was thinking, you know what, he is a perfect fit for us. But the more I've looked at it over the offseason and the more I've kind of gone back and watched some of the games and watched Russell's tape before the injury and after the injury, I'm not convinced that Russell Wilson is the quarterback that we all think he is. I think that there was significant decline before the injury, and he was pretty horrific after the injury. I think that this is a guy that, much was made about him being a shorter quarterback coming out from college. And, yes, it was a slightly ridiculous take that he was short. But the reason he's been able to, have the career he has is because he's had that mobility and he doesn't need to sit and look over the offensive line in order to create throwing lanes because he can manipulate the pocket and get outside the pocket and create throwing lanes. Well, from the games I watched last year, there was a significant decline in his mobility and his athleticism. Now, if he can't manipulate the pocket, if he can't get out of the pocket and create that space and those throw lanes to get the ball downfield, are we sure that he's good enough to sit in the pocket and pick a defense apart and without those open throw lanes? And I'll be honest, I'm slightly concerned. So Courtney Sutton's a guy that I've started dropping down my ranks. He's currently on wide receiver 35. I am lower than consensus on pretty much every part of this Broncos offense. I think largely because I'm a little bit concerned about Russell Wilson. And look, if Russell Wilson comes out week 1, week 2, and looks like 2019 Russell Wilson, then I'm going to be all in on this offense, and I'm going to sit happily, hold my hands up, and say, you know what, I was wrong. Judy, Sutton, Albert O, Javonte Williams, Russell Wilson, they're all flying up my ranks. But I'm seriously concerned about this offense, and I don't think it's as much of a slam dunk as it feels like everybody in the world seems to think.
I think the issue with Sutton is you're essentially having to choose between Sutton and Judy, and most people are siding with Sutton. I've seen a lot of people like Judy as well, but yeah, you're essentially having to pick one, and my concern around that is I don't think you have to. I think a lot of people are then picking one and wanting to go with that player fully, and then essentially forgetting about the other one. Whereas I don't think Russ is going to be horrendous to the point where he can't support 2 wide receiver 2s. At least, I mean, he's done it for years. Let's not weigh him down on that. I understand your points around him being less mobile, maybe, and going to a first-year head coach in a new team. There's a lot that has changed. He's going with essentially no weapons that he's used to. So there is a lot of change, and I get that. So maybe it does take him a year to get involved. But to me, I'm on the Sutton train over the Judy train. I just don't think at the costs I'm willing to take that shot. I mean, Sutton's going as a wide receiver 24 in ADP. But one thing I kind of wanted to get back to you with before we have to move on to the next player, Rich, is he was the wide receiver. He was a mid wide receiver too. I believe he ended up as the PPR wide receiver 19 in 2019. And that was with a mixture of quarterbacks of Joe Flacco, Drew Lock, and Brandon Allen. I mean, going back, Joe Flacco was better than your perception of him now, but he wasn't the Joe Flacco that won the Super Bowl. I mean, you look at Drew Lock, he was a rookie in that year, and Brandon Allen is where in the NFL now.
I want to say Cincinnati. Is he Cincinnati back up?
He might be, but my point is that with a mixture of quarterbacks, I mean, Flacco played 8 games, Locke played 5, and Allen 3. So he played with a mixture of quarterbacks and still ended up as the wide receiver 2, or a wide receiver 2. So before the injury, I think that he definitely had that prestige, and maybe that's where people are kind of remembering. So if Russ does get back to his 2019 kind of hype, that's what everyone is expecting to happen. Now, I agree with you. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that's a good ceiling to have. I think that Sutton will just be a middling wide receiver 2 at best. I think that he's probably going to end up as a wide receiver 3. So I'm kind of out at ADP for him. Now, come in. We'll go on.
I think I was just going to say, for me, if you're saying that Courtney Sutton's going 18 spots ahead of Brandon Ayuk, who's a guy we talked earlier in ADP, yes. So if you can give me Brandon Ayuk, and I mean, I'd take Brandon Ayuk over Courtney Sutton straight up, but if you're giving me Brandon Ayuk plus what's 18 spots in ADP, like, maybe a late second, something like that. Yeah. If you're giving me Ayuk and a second for Sutton, that's the easiest trade I'm making all day. That is unbelievable. I think it's just the Russ hype. So leading on to your receiver.
Yeah, again, we're going to stay and pick the wide receiver pair here. I've gone Jerry Jeudy. Now, my, I suppose, point around Jerry Jeudy is I'm struggling to see the hype around him. We've just spoken about it with Sutton, so I'm not going to go over it too much. You could basically copy and paste a lot of what we said with Sutton over to Jeudy. Now, Jeudy, I'm just questioning how much more he is that he has that we haven't seen yet. I mean, he's not been bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that he is a bad player. I loved his route running coming out or any. I just don't want people to get that the wrong way. I just think that I struggle to see a world where Jeudy is going to be a top 12 wide receiver. And I think at best he's just going to be a middling wide receiver 2 for the rest of the career. And that's not a bad guy to have on your roster. And at wide receiver 28, that kind of feels right. But with that as your ceiling at wide receiver 28, I'd much rather take a step down a tier and go for a guy like Brandon Ayuk, who has a similar ceiling, but is a lot cheaper and you can get a bit of value on top. And then I think it also goes on to the fact that I think Sutton is going to be the wide receiver 1 in that offense, but that's only if there is a wide receiver 1. I can kind of see a scenario where there's no clear wide receiver 1 and they both have defined roles, and it's not necessarily one gets 150 targets, one gets 130. It's more like they both get a very similar target share and similar snaps and etc. And for me, I just can't pick one of these two, and at ADP at cost, I just don't want either of them. Contract-wise, Sutton is there for longer as well. Sutton is there till 2024, and I believe Jeudy's contract runs out before that. So, if not at the same time, at the very least. So, Rich, where do you fit, or how do you come down on Jeudy?
I really like Jeudy coming out because I'm a route runner guy, and I think that if you can get open, that's amazing. But again, I don't see the natural fit with Russell Wilson. He's not a guy that's going to sit in the pocket, deliver the ball on time when the receiver has, won the route and got open. And I just don't think that it's a natural fit between the two. We've seen that the Broncos have, paid Courtney Sutton. They've paid Tim Patrick. Are they then going to pay Jerry Jeudy? I'm concerned that he could find himself, the odd man out at the end of the year. I don't think that he's ever going to realise that top 24 potential. And I think that for me, he's an easy fade at current costs. I just don't love this offense. I don't love Jeudy at his current price, and I think that he's an easy option to potentially move on from.
I think the one thing I wanted to clarify there was his contract does run out in 2023 or after the 2023 season, but he is a first rounder. And as you said, are they going to want to pay him a guaranteed 5th-year option? That is going to be a very high cost with the way that the wide receiver market has gone.
I think with the way 5th-year options are now, I think that basically, unless a player is a truly elite, top 5, top 10 performer at the position, or unless they're a quarterback, I don't think we're going to see many 5th-year options picked up because it's just such a risk. Now they're fully guaranteed. I don't know what the exact number is off the top of my head, but are the Broncos really going to want to guarantee Jerry Jeudy? Was it like 14, 16 million? Like that's a lot of money to be guaranteeing a guy that is probably at best a wide receiver 2 for your offense. I just don't see him being kept long term. But enough about the Broncos offense. Moving on to the Chargers. So my pick here is Isaiah Spiller. So he's currently the running back 42 in ADP. Obviously, we know this backfield is going to be largely led by Austin Eckler. I think there is a clear role for a 1B. We've seen every year that Eckler's been there. There's been a 1B and they've been fantasy relevant. I'm not convinced that Isaiah Spiller is going to be that guy. I think look, the potential's there. He produced really well in college, but obviously fell apart when it came to kind of draft day, and the NFL didn't value him perhaps as high as the fantasy community did going into the draft. I think that he's about valued right. I'm really intrigued to see how he runs over the next couple of weeks. I'm very interested to watch him in the preseason. But I think I don't know if you found this, but it feels like in every league I'm in, there's an Isaiah Spiller kind of believer, and I'm not sure his value of RB42 is actually kind of where he tends to be valued in leagues. I think there's a true believer out there in pretty much every league.
I think there's the trade value is completely different to the ADP right now. I think that is true with a lot of players, and Spiller is one of them. I know that I came across a weird corner of Twitter of Spiller still being called the running back 2 and the running back 1 in this class about a few weeks ago. So there are definitely still believers out there. To me, yeah, I think I agree with you in terms of he's valued about right at RB42. I mean, there's guys that I like after him. So surprise, Kenneth Gainwell, Michael Carter and Darrell Henderson are all going behind him right now in ADP. And those guys I still like roughly on the same, if not around a little bit ahead of him. But Rich, I'm going to move on to my player, and that is Keane Allen for the Chargers. He's currently going as the wide receiver 20. I suppose I wanted to bring this up for a very simple question for you. What do you feel Keane Allen's future is going to hold? Because I looked at his contract and I was very surprised because his contract is completely cuttable now. And I mean, like, it's wide open for him to be cut after this season. There's not a lot of room to be cut. There's about 3 to 4 million, I believe, next year. I'm just going to get this up to double check because it's not included in my notes. But after that, he is like, the Chargers would save a lot of money to cut him. So to me, I'll correct myself. Next year, they save 15 million, and the year after, so 2024, they would save, 23 million by cutting him. And if he's already 30 going into this year, so that's his 31st and 32nd season, age-wise. So to me, I think he's completely cuttable. They've just paid Mike Williams. Josh Palmer is a guy that a lot of people are on. Where do you come down on Keenan? Because to me, wide receiver 20 is a complete, you either win,
I think,
now, or you doesn't get cut year on year.
I think I disagree with you, because I think that I'd agree with you if Keane Allen was pretty much any other receiver in the NFL. But I think, look, Keane Allen is a guy, he is not a good athlete. And let me caveat that, sorry. He is an incredible athlete. He is a terrible NFL athlete. Okay? If you look at him, he has never been a quick guy. He has never been a fast 40 guy. He is a guy that wins because he is an absolute route technician and he can get open at will. I truly believe that this is a guy that's going to age well. This is a guy that we are going to see age and continue to produce, tied to a truly elite young quarterback. And I see no reason why his value is going to fall off a cliff in terms of production. Now, with Keane Allen, I think you have got a serious question of what are you doing with him? I think if you're viewing him as a I'm going to try and get return on my investment in terms of a sale value, you've probably missed that window. You probably need to sell a year ago, but you need to sell now, because I think once you get over that age 30 season, next year, as you said, he's going to be age 31. People are already going to be starting writing those obituaries, and his value is going to plummet. And next year, we'll probably see him ranked in the wide receiver 40 to wide receiver 50 range, like Adam Thielen is this year in ADP. But for me, I think that he's a guy that's going to continue to produce as a fringe wide receiver 1, probably a wide receiver 2 for the next 2-3 years. So I think as a, an aggressive asset, I'm happy to buy at his current value and hold for the next 3 years, because I think I'm going to get wide receiver 2 production out of him for the next 3 years.
The one thing I did want to say on Keenan was, I'm not saying that he's bad. I'm just saying in future, I think that future is completely unstable. And you are basically hoping year on year that he doesn't fall off a cliff, because if he does, there's no way that the Chargers can or will hold on to him with the amount that they can save in the next 2 seasons. Keenan Allen has actually been better in games where Mike Williams has played. Now, caveat that with, there's only been 3 games that Mike Williams has missed in his 3 years in the league. So it's not like it's a huge sample size, but with Williams being a guy that won't take over the wide receiver 1 position and basically has just been paid for, I believe it was 2 years when we looked at the contract, Rich, that even though it's a 3 years deal, it's a 2-year deal with a kind of an option at the end. I think that he's set as the wide receiver 1 in that offense, tied to a young quarterback. But again, as I said, I question if he falls off a cliff in some capacity, what happens to him then, because there's no contract security. I'm going to move on to the Chiefs because we are running over, as we knew that we were going to do anyway, Rich. My play for the Chiefs is Sky Moore, wide receiver 32 in ADP right now. I see that as way too high. He's going ahead of Mike Williams, who's I just kind of mentioned a little bit, and Devonta Smith as wide receiver 36. I mean, to me, why is Sky Moore going over both of those? I feel like this landing or this ADP is landing spot influenced, like his rookie draft value was as well. Where do you come down on Sky Moore, Rich? Because I know that a lot of people are high on him, but I don't know how many of people are this high on him based on talent or should we say 80 to 90% talent. I think the landing spot plays a lot more into this than people care to admit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still really grumpy about Sky Moore because I loved Sky Moore. I loved Sky Moore in the pre-draft process, and I thought that he was going to be this year's Elijah Moore for me. I thought he was going to go to any old team in the second round, and I was going to be able to scoop him up in rookie drafts everywhere because I thought he was going to be undervalued. And I thought I'm just going to love this guy because I think he ticks a lot of boxes. I think he's a good route runner. I think he's got a good statistical profile. I think people tried to pigeonhole him as a slot. I think he can move around. I think he can play outside. And then he goes to the Chiefs, and everybody's like, okay, skyrockets his value. He's away with everything, and it's just like, yeah, okay, I can't get on board with those prices, and it's still the case. I really like the player, but the price is just too high. I think that he could be a guy that we're sitting back here in, a year's time, and he could easily be a top 12 receiver in terms of dynasty value. If he has an Elijah Moore like rookie season, he's tied to Andy Reid, he's tied to Patrick Mahomes. I could easily see him being valued as a top 12 guy. But I just think at the moment that's not a realistic outcome. And I think that there are enough options in this offense that are going to eat that Elijah Moore like rookie season isn't going to happen for Sky Moore. And I think that, yes, he's going to be a really good NFL receiver. He's probably going to be a good fantasy receiver, but wide receiver 32, that's just too expensive for me.
Rich, do you want to move on to your player for the
Chiefs? Absolutely. I'll keep this brief. MVS still criminally undervalued. This is a guy that he's the only guy in the Chiefs receiver room that's being paid. Everybody seems to be obsessed with Juju, and Juju signed a pathetic 1-year contract, and yet again hasn't got the market on free agency that he seems to have. Everybody seems to believe. MVS has got paid. MVS is going to come in. We're going to see him play in that big slot role. I think the underrated thing with MVS is that he is a fantastic running blocker, and he's going to see the field. And I really, truly believe that his floor is what he produced in Green Bay. I think that we've seen Andy Reid is able to make use of unique and different offensive weapons. And I think that MVS is easily going to outproduce wide receiver 62 just this year. He signed a 3-year contract. He's tied to the Chiefs for 2 more years. And I think that for me, MVS in all formats, in everything, is a screaming buy right now, because wide receiver 62 in value is it's like theft.
Okay, I'm going to pose a question to you before I start. What you said his floor is what he produced in Green Bay. What did he produce in Green Bay? Can you tell me what you think he produced in Green Bay? Yards, touchdowns, whatever you want to give me.
Well, I can tell you exactly what he produced because I've got it open in front of me.
Oh, I was trying to do it when you didn't have it in front of you, because that's what my point was going to be, is his perception of what he did in Green Bay probably isn't what he actually did in Green Bay, whether that's a good or a bad thing. I know a lot of people had that perception of him running deep, dropping balls. And yes, he did that to an extent. Every wide receiver will do that. But at the same time, he wasn't hugely productive. He never had over 700 yards receiving. He did have one season, which was his 2020 season, where he had 690 yards, and that was his most productive season with 6 touchdowns. But with a guy like Aaron Rodgers, yes, there is Devontae Adams in that same offense. So he's not got that top elite guy to, I suppose, compete with. I think that MVS, even though he is getting paid, I still don't think is the most talented guy there. And this is coming from a guy that defended MVS like with everything I could on Twitter when it came to people, especially Green Bay Twitter, going at MVS. I mean, I like the guy, but I just don't think he's going to be as big as you think. I don't think his ceiling is there. At the same time, I do think that he is undervalued at wide receiver 62 right now.
I think his ceiling is absolute. Like, I think to me, his ceiling is as high as pretty much any NFL receiver from a fantasy perspective. This is a guy that, yes, okay, let's talk about that 2020 season. He produced a wide receiver 55 finish on 63 targets.
And only caught 33 of those targets.
Yeah, but he had an ADOT of over 18 yards. You're not expected to catch a huge amount of targets when you're only getting targeted downfield. Now, I think in this offense, I think 2 things are going to happen. I think he's going to be used as that deep threat, but I think they're going to get the ball in his hands. I think they're going to use him in that screen game more. I wouldn't be shocked. I think his realistic outcome is 80 targets this year. Now, if you're giving MVS 80 targets, I easily think he's a top 36, top 40 receiver. And you're getting him at wide receiver 62 prices.
This is my point about
he's tied to Patrick Mahomes for 2 more years. I just think that with where he's going currently, there's no risk. What's the risk with MVS? Okay, you pay wide receiver 62 prices. He doesn't produce. You wait till next offseason. Somebody's going to get hyped up by watching him catch 1 deep ball in the playoffs, and then you can sell him. The value is incubated because he's tied to that Chiefs offense next year. And the potential ceiling is massive. What happens if MVS sees 100, 120 targets? The guy's going to be a top 24 receiver.
I agree, but I still don't see him getting those type of targets. If he gets used in I suppose, Tyreek Hill light role, then I can see the hype around him becoming a top 24 wide receiver or around that range. I just don't see it happening for him. And that's my issue. As you said, if he gets 80 to 100 targets, I can easily see him being a wide receiver 3, a top 36 wide receiver. That's why I'm saying that I think he's undervalued. I just don't see the same range of outcomes as you. But we are going to have to move on because we're running over, Rich. I'm going to move on to the Raiders, and my player, I'm going to stick with the wide receiver room and go for Hunter Renfro. He's currently going as the wide receiver 46. But I'm going to question what he's going to be in this offense. I'm not saying that he won't be good. I'm just saying I seriously don't understand what his role is going to be in this style of offense. I mean, you've got a new head coach. You've got Darrell Waller, who is still going to be there. And you've got, obviously, Devontae Adams getting traded there. So they are going to use Adams in basically every situation. Hunter Renfro last year had an amazing year. But to me, I just question how much he's going to be used and in what situation. I can see a similar situation to MVS where he gets around 80 targets. But his only year where he is safe in his new 3-year or 2-year extension is the year he didn't actually sign in that 2-year extension. It's the current year coming up. His 2-year extension are both years are extremely friendly to the Raiders in terms of they can basically cut him whenever they want. They saved $6 million in 2023 and $12 million in 2024. That entire Raiders offense outside of Adams is kind of sketchy in the future. I mean, we'll move on to another guy in that offense, but Waller is in a very similar situation contract-wise. He's got no dead cap this year or next year. And to me, it kind of feels like it's either going to be Waller or Renfro as the odd one out next year. I don't know how you feel about this, Rich. I think that Renfro is just going to take a step back. I mean, compared to last year's production, wide receiver 46 kind of feels about right for what I'm kind of projecting for him. But at the same time, I don't ever foresee his value going up past wide receiver 40. And that's not a guy I want to take in that range.
Yeah, I think there's a misunderstanding with Hunter Renfro and how he's kind of produced as a fantasy asset last year. And I think that everybody think of, third and Renfro and he's like Cole Beasley, where he just gets fed a huge amount of targets and it's those short and intermediate routes, and everybody's going to continue to kind of carry on again this year. But the reason Hunter Renfro did so well from a fantasy perspective last year was because he was incredible in the red zone. He saw 23 targets inside the red zone and turned 9 of them into touchdowns. If you take that inside the 10, he saw 13 targets. He caught 8 of them and scored 6 touchdowns. This is a guy that, yes, you can understand how he is so good in the red zone because he is shifty. He is able to create space quickly. And that fits well with Derek Carr, who's an accurate passer. But if we're projecting forward, are you really telling me that Devontae Adams, who's probably the best red zone wide receiver in the NFL, and you've got Darren Waller, who is a physical freak, an athletic freak, that is a mix-up match for any defensive player in the league, yet we're going to see Hunter Renfro getting 20 plus targets in the red zone again? I don't believe it. I think that you highlighted a fantastic point on the contract, and we'll come on to my guy, who's Derek Carr. I have no idea what the Raiders are doing with contracts. I can't get my head around it. I think that the Raiders are all in for this year but also in a potential scenario where they can blow it all up next year. They've extended Derek Carr, they've extended Hunter Renfro, but basically not given them any more money guaranteed. It's such a weird scenario that they can move on from both of them almost immediately.
Yeah, I think it's a weird situation because I've just looked at Davante Adams' contract, and they have less dead cap than cap hit in every season apart from this current season coming up. And they have a potential out after the 2024 season. And that entire offense is based around basically that entire offense not doing well in 2 years' time, and they can move on from every single skill position player. I mean, they've already moving on from Josh Jacobs. They haven't brought him back on his 5th-year option. The only other thing is Zamir White, who drafted, who was a 4th, 5th round rookie running back. So there's no commitment to that entire offense past 2024, essentially. So that's where I struggle with Carr, is because people are seeing that he's had a new extension, but they may not have actually looked into that contract and the entire offense around him. I'm obviously not saying that if it doesn't work out that the Raiders are going to then cut the guy that they've just traded a 1st and 2nd for, given a huge contract to Carr. Waller is one of the best tight ends at the moment. And then another guy that they've just paid. I'm not saying they're going to cut all 4 of those guys and then move on from Josh Jacobs, but you can't count any single one of those in 2 years' time. It's weird.
Yeah. And I think with Derek Carr, I think, look, this is, one of my traditional lines of, I think that we're overvaluing age when it comes to quarterbacks. I think that if you said to anybody, is Derek Carr going to outproduce Zach Wilson, Tua, Justin Fields, Mac Jones, Kenny Pickett in 2022 in fantasy production? Most people would say yes. Is he going to outproduce him in 2023 in fantasy production? Most people say yes. 2024, probably say yes again. Yet Derek Carr is going below most of those in Dynasty ADP. Why? We talk about 2 to 3 year windows with players of every position, yet people are throwing it out with Derek Carr. Yes, we've made the points about his contract and it's movable, but if the Raiders decide to move on from Derek Carr, there is 18 NFL teams that are picking up the phone to Derek Carr because he'd be an upgrade on their quarterback. I believe that Derek Carr is easily a top 15 NFL quarterback, borderline top 10. And there is no world in which he isn't a starting NFL quarterback over the next 3 years. Yet I can get him at QB 18. To me, that's criminal. This is a guy that is from a fantasy perspective, a top 15 option easily. And I just think that, yes, we've raised some question marks about him, but let's not forget he's getting the best receiver in the NFL. He's just being plopped on his lap. And people haven't really changed his value. It's I think Derek Carr's ADP is criminal, and I think that at QB 18, I think he's an absolute steal.
Yeah, I think with Carr, the way I'm viewing him is I'm very skeptically optimistic, and what I mean by that is I think that he can be very good this year, and as you said, I don't think he's going to. I don't think he's going to ever be outside of the top 20 quarterbacks in terms of the next few years. But at the same time, I'm not immediately penciling him in for a top 10 floor in the coming season just because he's got Adams back. There's question marks around whether he's going to gel with Adams immediately. I know that they were the college duo, but it's also been how many years since they were the college duo. As I said, I'm skeptically optimistic about that entire offense and Carr specifically, but I can completely understand the point that you've got around Carr not really going to be outside of or out of fashion in terms of the QB market coming up. But Rich, that brings us to the end of the Wild West. That was impressive for us to only be 10 minutes over. I thought that was pretty good for us.
I'm pleased.
So because we haven't prepared a dynasty tip, I'm going to read one off my list that I've already created. So my dynasty tip that I'm going to share with the listeners will be just be real with yourself, especially at this time of year. Not everyone is a contender. Your roster does not, just because you can kind of see a wild scenario where it is a contender doesn't mean that you are realistically one. So just be real with yourself and be real with other people's rosters. If you don't think it's a contending roster, maybe have a look for their picks and see whether you can get them. But yeah, just be real.
Like that.
So listeners, that is all we have on the show sheet. So that's all we have for you. We'll be back next week at 8 p.m. UK time on a Tuesday, or the audio pod will be out later in the week. But until then, stay safe and we'll see you then, Rush Nation.